Okay, for the next speaker session, Jesse is going to talk about formal proof of the independence of continuum hypothesis.
Thank you, Forrest. And thank you, Tom, for inviting me to speak during all lessons. Okay, so I want to start by pointing out that this is work that's joint with Forrest, and that this is a spiritual successor to my previous talk, last meeting. And so when I gave my previous talk, I made a promise to myself that the next time I gave a talk, the title would be one word shorter. And so I'm proud to announce that towards has now been taken out of the title. Okay, so what is the continuum hypothesis? So it was proposed by Cantor in the 19th century. Asks if there is an infinite cardinality that you can fit that is larger than the natural numbers, but smaller than the power set of the natural numbers. And this became Hilbert's first question in his list of questions that he posed in the first Congress of Mathematicians in Paris in 1900. And this question was fully resolved 60 years later in 1963 by Paul Cohen and Gödel. To solve the problem and to prove the independence of CH, Cohen invented forcing, a technique which transformed set theory and won him a Fields Medal, the only one that was ever awarded for work in logic.
So does this mean it's a proper mathematician?
Yes, because Fields Medal are like the currency of pure mathematics, right? Peter Schulze gets a Fields Medal, everyone rushes to formalize perfectoid spaces. Cohen got a Fields Medal. It took me a bit longer to formalize forcing. Here we are. And it's never been formalized. So how I came to start working on this problem was, so right before I started my PhD, Tom invited me to come to Hanoi to learn Lean at a formal abstracts summer program at Tonlong University. Some of the participants are while we were talking about Lean, we wanted to compare it against the other theorem provers. And so, of course, computer scientists like benchmarks. You run a program on a benchmark and you eke out a few more percentage points, and that's a paper. So, the standard benchmark in theorem proving for since 2003 or 4 or so has been Freak's 100 list. He makes the somewhat dubious claim that these are elementary. I think not most of them are elementary, although many of them are. So we saw the list of the theorems that have been formalized, and of course, number 1 was John Harrison. He did I think 80 of them or something, and then there was Koch and Isabel.
86.
Oh yeah. But I was surprised to see that. So I wasn't surprised that there were a few hard problems left. So when we saw the list, there were only 6 problems left, or maybe 7 because scholars hadn't done the cubing of the cube problem. But I was surprised to see that the independence of CH was still on the list, because so my background is in logic, and as everyone who has taken a course in set theory knows, forcing the independence of CH is something which is supposed to be not that hard, right? It's something which has been taken from the first version given by Cohen and boiled down to something which can be built from the ground up in relatively short fashion. And so I thought, well, this should be easy, right? So why not try to do it? And so, had never been formalized until now. So that's why I started the Fly Pitch project. I wanted to formalize the independence of CH. And we did it. We formalized the independence of CH. And along the way, we built reusable libraries for mathematical logic and set theory. The project is open source. You can download it. You can build on top of our formalization of first-order logic and start doing model theory. You could do hyperreals the right way, by defining an ultra product of first order models. Because then it's easier to prove the transfer theorem. And it's written in Lean 3. And that's good. It means it has the right column. Okay, so to help you guys get a sense of the scope of the project, right, to make Lean even understand what you're trying to prove. Right? Like you're saying that some sentence is not provable, and the negation of that sentence is also not provable from some first order theory. Well, that means that you have to start with first order logic, right? Like you can't just work in Lean's logic, because Lean is stronger than first order logic. Instead, you have to simulate first order logic inside of Lean. So that means you have to have types of symbols in your language. You need a type of terms, a type of formulas. You need a notion of free and bound variables. You need provability. So on top of that, you have to build your implementation of first order logic such that you can talk about provability in the same way, such that you don't lose your mind because of Lean. And then once all this is implemented, you then have to write down ZFC, but inside this deep embedding of first order logic, and you have to write down CH. So that's just if you want to state it. But if you want to prove it, you also have to look at the semantics, right? You have to do the soundness theorem. You actually don't need the completeness theorem, but we did it anyways. And then, because we use Boolean valued models, you have to do Boolean valued soundness and semantics and Boolean valued models. And then finally, you have to translate the forcing argument, right, which is something that's very set theoretic. Forcing is always written down in textbooks as something happening like internal to a model set theory. And you have to figure out what parts of those arguments can be translated to type theory and how. So that's all the stuff we did. Well, the subset of the games. Okay, so let's start on syntax. So the first thing we implemented was first order logic. So just to see if we could even state it. So for us, a language is a structure, and we have a family of types parameterized by the natural numbers or function symbols, and similarly for our predicate symbols. And this natural number argument is meant to stand for the array. So the type that sits over 0 would be the constants here in the functions. And the type that sits over 2, for example, would be the binary. So for example, this is how you would write down the language of groups. The language of the variables. And because there are no relation symbols, then you just say, oh, it's the constant function that points at the end. Okay, so that's one tiny piece of first order logic, but so far so good. So the main idea here is due to Flores. He came up with this really clever technique of partially applying terms, right? Because this way we don't have to apply symbols to vectors of terms and carry around proofs that those vectors are the right length. Right? So instead, the knowledge that like you have exactly 2 more slots to fill in with terms for a particular symbol is built into the type itself. Right? So preterms are partially applied terms, right? And all the terms sit at the bottom level. Those are the terms that have accepted all of their arguments. And you can see that it's built very straightforwardly. Right? If you have a function that is of arity L, then it becomes a preterm of level L. And then you can apply them, which will decrease that level. So this was a really nice idea. Because so it also makes working with first order theories in a theoretical sense much easier. Right? Because later on when we did the completeness theorem, we found that this made our life a lot easier when we had to do recursion on the functions. We didn't have to work with tricky induction principles or anything like that. It was all built in. And something similar works for formulas. So instead of function symbols which produce terms in your models, you're now producing truth values, but the idea is the same. You have this, these levels. Okay, so as a sanity check and as a stress test of our implementation, we did the completeness and the compactness theorems. That took about a month, I think. Yeah. Well, so there was a lot more stuff we had to build up in the background. So what happened was Flores joined the project and he had this great idea of how to do first order logic. And then he had the soundness theorem done. I was like, okay, this is great. Now let's try the completeness theorem. And the completeness theorem took an order of magnitude longer, but it was still really pleasant. Things really worked out well. And the compactness theorem follows from the completeness theorem, modulo some annoying arguments. But this was a really good sign. So we had this done by the end of Thanksgiving weekend last year, and I was feeling really optimistic. Okay, so now that we finished this, right? So we have syntax. We haven't written down ZFC yet, and in fact, I won't talk about this in the talk. But this is also so here we have syntax, and now we need forcing. Right? We need Boolean value models. So I'm going to take a departure from the previous versions of this talk. So I'm going to try to give a high-level overview of the choices that we have to make when we formalize these. So if you look at the accounts and textbooks of how to do the independence of CH, forcing arguments, there are two main flavors. There are Boolean valued models, and there's forcing with a poset, and you fix some filter, and it has to satisfy some condition. But in either case, you construct a class of names. You use these, so these names are built out of a ground model that you begin with. And they sort of form a superset of the model that you started with. And then there are two ways that you can work with the names. You can either stick with the poset, right, and pick a filter and use it to evaluate the names. And you have to be careful to check that you pick the right filter, and this actually creates a model of ZFC that has a certain sentence source true or false. Or you can just work with the names straight up. Right. But the price of this is that you have to work with Boolean value logic instead. So these are the two paths that you can take. So we ended up taking this one. So we use Boolean value models. But a big problem for someone who's like looking at textbook accounts and trying to see if doing this is possible, right, is that all the arguments are written in set theory. And at first glance, it seems really hard to get the set theory happening, right? Like so this corresponds to the first approach, right? You stick with the poset and you use a filter to evaluate your names to produce a map, right? Like, so if you try to pretend that like set means type, like you turn all the sets into types, and instead you work in like a type universe instead of V, like this won't type check, right? Like, what does it mean to take the intersection of two types? Like, right? You take a pullback. So I mean, seeing stuff like this was not very encouraging. So I mean, one way to resolve this could be like, you assume that you have a type which is the model of ZFC, and then your poset P is actually a set that lives inside that type. And then G will also be a set that lives inside that type. Right? But then that means that you have to carry out much of the argument completely inside of that model of set. And that's bad, right? Because as lean users, we all know that you shouldn't fight Lean's type theory, right? Because when you do, it punishes you, right? Like, your motive is not type correct. You get into like type theory hell, right? And so when you add that extra layer of abstraction, lean will slow down, right? And your formalization will be much slower because you have to deal with the fact that like you are simulating another logic inside of a logic that is completely separate. Okay, so I mean, there are three ingredients here, right? There are names, there's forcing with a poset, and there's Boolean value. So this is what happens if you look at the standard count. First approach, right? But for names, it looks a bit better, kind of, right? Like you squint at this and you see, oh, well, maybe this could be an inductive. Right? But so again, like if you look at this, it just looks really set theoretic, right? Like you're doing a transfinite induction on the rank of sets. Like you have an indicator function that you're building by transfinite approaching. And then, well, if you look at like most accounts of forcing a Boolean value model, you have this really set theoretic thing, right? Like you're taking the von Neumann hierarchy, but you're like generalizing it to a Boolean algebra, and yeah. And then you're taking a union of all of these things, but like that's again something that makes no sense in such a But the upshot of this is that you look at this and you realize that this could be an inductive type, right? It's like a W type. If you have a thing which is like functions into some fixed thing, right? But the domain is like things that you built at previous stages. Like that is an inductive type. So you have something to work with. And in fact, that is the main idea. But again, so just looking at all this, right? So the naive approach would be to just fix some model as you see inside of the movie and just work completely inside the model. You just replicate all the arguments, word for word. But that would be really slow, right? Yikes. Let's not do that. And so the question that we had to face was, do we have to do this? And the answer is no. So the first step is we use the Boolean value models to avoid filters. And the key observation is to realize that we can implement the names as an inductive type. It generalizes the axle sets. So this is how a standard model set theory is built inside of it. So if you look in set theory.lean, right, so this is the main thing. So you build a universe of sets. So I mean, these things are like trees. So a P set is a tree of P sets that's indexed by the type in a type universe, and it lives in the next one up. So this is the cumulative hierarchy inside of Lean. And you can see, for example, that like this has to be non-empty because the empty set corresponds to make of n. We can talk about the equivalence of two sets such that you have extensionality. You do it by using the induction principle. So Mario implemented this, and he also built up a fairly big set theory just for this model. So what we do to build B names is we add a third field, right, where the indexing type now additionally has a characteristic mark. And you can think of this as assigning a Boolean true value. So this tells you whether or not it's a thing is inside your Boolean value set with a certain true value. So if you take B to be the singleton algebra, then B set unit is P set. And this is the right notion of DB. So like this is how you implement this inside of it. So once we had this, then it was natural to proceed and just try to do the Boolean value approach to this. So you can turn these things into a model of set theory as follows, right? So we define equality by structural induction. We say that two Boolean valued sets are equal if for every element of the first there exists an element of the second, such that those two things are equal. right? But you do it internally inside the Boolean algebra. So you become supremum and infimum, but inside of B. And then you can do membership in terms of equality. And so this turns it into a structure in the language of set theory. And fundamental theorem of forcing for Boolean valued models is that you can view this as a B-value model of set theory. So I'm not going to go into the details of forcing, but I will give a high-level picture. So typically, when you do the independence of CH, it goes like this. Right? You follow Cohen's argument, you force using a poset and a filter and transitive model. That's how you force non-CH. But for forcing CH, you don't force CH because you can just build L and then verify that L satisfies CH. So in our formalization, we do something different. So we use Boolean value models. And we use Cohen forcing, but the Boolean value version of Cohen forcing. But then we also force CH through another kind of forcing. So this was actually faster for us because we didn't know the right way to construct L. But when we had to do this half of the argument, we had already completed Cohen forcing. And so the machinery was there. We just had to plug in another Boolean algebra and carry out that separate forcing. So to give you an idea of what forcing entails, you have to analyze the properties of B. So for a general B, the only thing that you know about it is that B set B forms a model of set B. But once you pick a particular B, right, then that will induce links between the notions of size and order and lean with that inside of the model. And you have to use the particular properties of B to figure out how lean's notion of size and order will influence that, but internally inside of B set. And you have to do a fair amount of set theory, but completely inside of B. The ordinals, you have to do induction of ordinals and so on. And this was the most technically involved part of formalization. But I think the main key idea was our construction of names in terms of yeah. Okay, so just to give a quick timeline of the project. So June 2018, I saw Frank's list. September, I started the project, and then in October, Flores joined, and the sounds theorem was done in a week. Completeness theorem, and then we did nothing over the winter because we went to lean together. Stuff. But then I figured out how to do B set around this time, and then a month later we had finished Cohen forcing and improvability CH. March because the ITP deadline was at the end of March. And then in the summer we started on the other half of the argument. So I did most of the setup for that half of the argument in Hanoi. And then we finished forcing CH at the end of the summer, and then right after ITP, we finished the independence of CH, and the total time it took was 1 year and 4 days. So at the beginning I thought, well, this should be easy, right? And so was it easy? Maybe not, because it took 20K lines of code in 1 year. But maybe that's just how formalization goes. One surprising thing that I found was that you don't really need a ground model of set theory to do forcing. Right? Like, forcing is always presented as like this machine for taking some existing model of set theory and somehow changing it. Right? But what our formalization shows is that you don't have to start with a model of set theory at all. You can just start with a type universe and just build the Boolean value model of set theory in one shot. You have to overcome the challenge that textbook accounts of forcing are really set theoretic, and it's not clear at all how to translate things in type. Lean really helped with trying to figure this out. There were certain parts that I didn't even know how to do in the sense of like math. Like typically when you formalize something, like you know the general mathematical argument, right? But then you try to do it in Lean, and then like Lean creates problems which you have to solve. Right? So in this sense, it's different. some parts of the forcing argument for CH I couldn't find, and so I had no idea how to do it. And I figured out how to do it, but completely through Lean. So I experimented with things inside of Lean, and like copied and pasted proofs and saw what parts broke, and that allowed me to see what parts of the argument needed to be modified in order to force. We also wrote a lot of custom tactics for simulating first-order logic proofs inside of Lean made that really easy to write because we could write tactics. Lean was its own tactic language. Thank you.
Okay, let's time for a couple of quick questions. Mariana?
So you said you generalize forcing to all the starting from your side. Or when you do forcing, you want to iterate all forcing extensions to add various things to the model, or a sample model with a given property and add a forcing extension to modify the other property. Can you now also do forcing on existing models of that instead of
Can we also do forcing inside of a model of set theory?
No, I mean, if I give you a model of set theory satisfying some property, and then construct a forcing extension of that model.
I'm not sure. I think, so for iterative forcing, I think that could be implemented using B-set. Like you force once, right, with B0, and then you construct B1 by using a smallness argument, pull back some property from the forcing extension down to the type of use, right? And then you just do the set of B1, right? And just keep going. So I think it would be possible to do iterative forcing, but I don't know specifically the answer to the question.
So if you've been working in a set theory improvement like Isabel's set of C, would you think formalization would have been longer or shorter?
Yes, I think it would have been more painful. So we used the fact that, like, we could go up the universe in several places. Like, for example, our forcing extensions live in like the next type universe up. So it's like a proper class. And we work with like the classes of ordinals and cardinals quite frequently. And it's not possible to talk about them without circumlocuting simple types.
Okay, let's practice again.